Lights will guide you home, and I promise I will burn for you, by rayrae118. Chapter 10. Ron, Ginny, Hermione, Susan, Neville and Luna flew over after lunch, and they all settled in the library with their friends, catching up on school assignments and the like. Though they didn't say anything, just the fact that they were there and supporting Blaise, Daphne and Astoria really meant a lot to the trio. The adults had decided to give the kids some time to rest, especially given the attacks on the green grasses and Madame Zabini. Sirius pulled Harry aside and told him there would be a meeting that evening. Harry bit his lip as he glanced over at his friends. "We can set Astoria up with a movie after dinner, to keep her occupied." Sirius nodded. "Sounds like a good plan. How are the others Occlumency coming? I know they were good enough over the summer, but not quite perfect." Harry nodded. "I told them to set up a time with Jason over the break, just to make sure. But I'm pretty sure they're at the same level as the rest of us." He shrugged. "Of course, I could just be failing at legilimency, and they really awful." Sirius nodded. "Somehow I doubt that's the case." He sighed. "How are they doing?" His voice softened as he looked over at the group of students working at several tables around the room. Harry sighed, his gaze also shifting over to his friends. "I think they really appreciated the mini sleepover we had last night. Blaise won't say it, but he's worried about his mum. Madame Zabini's not exactly young, but from what you said, she's doing just fine. It's Daphne and Astoria I'm worried about. They miss their mum." Sirius nodded. "That's only natural. Just be the good friend that you are, and be there for them. If they want or need something, be there. Talk to them, or just listen." Harry nodded his agreement. It was no less than he was already planning. Sirius cleared his throat to get the attention of the rest of the group. "Dinner will be ready in a few minutes, so you guys should think about packing up." They all nodded and put their books and parchment in order before heading into the dining room. When the meal was over, Harry gestured for his classmates along with Ginny and Luna to stay put while he led Astoria up to the entertainment suite. He showed her the movies and how to operate the VHS player, and suggested a few good films that she might enjoy, before he returned to the rest of the group. "There's a meeting tonight, so if you're up for it, we should head up." They all nodded and left the dining room. When they reached the library, they settled down to wait for the adults. They came in groups over the next 10 minutes, giving greetings to the teenagers and condolences to Blaise and Daphne. Andromeda and Ted arrived just a step behind their daughter and Remus, and a few minutes later Bill and Fleur entered, followed by Fred and George. Minerva and Sirius came in, still deep in conversation with Molly and Arthur right behind them. Augusta arrived not long after that, and Snape slipped in just as the meeting was about to start. Once Minerva saw that they all were there, she started the meeting by informing those who weren't aware of the attack that had taken place a few days ago. "Mr. Zabini, Miss Greengrass, we are so sorry for what your families are going through." Minerva's voice was compassionate as she looked at her students. They both nodded and the professor continued. 4 Death Eaters were arrested, though none of them were high up enough for us to really have much use. They've all been sentenced to prison time. She took a deep breath. It is believed that the leader of the attack was Cadman Avery. Unfortunately, he escaped before he could be apprehended. "He was the one who killed my mum, wasn't he?" Daphne asked, though it sounded like more of a statement than a question. Minerva looked at her and nodded regretfully. "The Aurors think so. None of the others had the killing curse on their wands when Priori Incantatem was performed." Daphne looked like she was trying not to show how upset she was. Minerva shared a look with Sirius. "Amelia and Kingsley are staying late at the Ministry tonight, to try and work through the details on the attack. That's why they aren't here." From there, the meeting turned to the other updates. The Weasley twins showed the group a few of their newer inventions, including a prototype that they were working on that, if they could work out a few kinks, would act as sort of a blanket stunner. Harry was very intrigued, since it could potentially knock out anywhere from 2 to upwards of 10 people at a time.
That's brilliant, guys,
he said as they finished the demonstration.
Let us know when you can get it to work.
Fred nodded, grinning. We think this just might be the jumping off point. Once we get the idea to work, we can create devices that send up an area charm, or perhaps a cutting curse. We just need to figure out the details. Hermione examined the prototype. These look remarkably similar to Muggle grenades. And the way you pull this here, she gestured to the small pin at the top, and throw them, it's exactly the way Muggles use grenades.
George nodded eagerly. Exactly. We modelled them after the Muggle grenades. We call them Magi grenades. He shrugged. Not the most original name, but it works. Sirius smiled. An ingenious idea, guys. This could really come in handy. Let us know if you need any help with anything.
The twins nodded, understanding. A few months earlier, Sirius had signed on as another silent partner to the Weasleys' Wizarding Wheezes. They had formalised both partnership and Harry's, so that he and Harry would each receive 10% of the profits in exchange for their monetary backing.
How are the listening devices coming?
Harry asked curiously. They hadn't heard anything since the summer. The twins shared a rueful look before George spoke.
We're a little stalled on getting them to work without active magic powering them, but we'll keep working on it.
Harry nodded and they moved on. The next issue they discussed was the new prison Amelia was spearheading.
The prisoners will be transferred from Azkaban on the 1st. Amelia has put a lot of time and effort into this, and the new location is unplottable, with the layers of wards that the goblins contributed to, thanks to our resident Gringotts employees.
He smiled at Bill and Fleur, who nodded their thanks in recognition. It had taken several days of negotiations, but the goblins were paid well for their troubles, and they understood that assisting the Ministry in locking up Death Eaters was in their best interest. Sirius's expression turned somber.
There will be a short window of time where the wards on Azkaban will be down, while prisoners are being transferred. We're keeping this operation under wraps for now for that reason. We don't want any word of this getting out, because if the enemy knew that this was happening, they could use it to stage a breakout. How many people know? Harry asked.
Sirius bit his lip.
A few Auras, Amelia, us. Those who will need to be involved in the transportation will be told the night it happens, to lessen the chances of it getting out.
They all nodded and moved on. As the meeting came to a close, Sirius coughed lightly, drawing all the attention back to him.
Amelia was supposed to be here, but as you know, she got caught up at work, so I'll just make the announcement.
He paused for a moment, smirking when several people rolled their eyes exasperatedly.
We've decided we're going to get married on New Year's Eve.
A few people looked startled. Isn't the minister's wedding going to be a huge deal? Andromeda asked, raising an eyebrow.
Sirius shrugged. Exactly why we'd rather do it here, in private. We don't want the press or any other unwelcome gatecrashers attending. You're all invited, but that's it. Neither of us really has a large family.
I like the idea of a small wedding, Susan commented. It's much more intimate.
Yes, Sirius nodded. We don't want people showing up just because it's the minister's wedding. We'll send out announcements all that later. We're not trying to hide it or anything. I just don't think that would be possible, considering who we are. We just want to be able to enjoy it with those we care about without having to be diplomats.
Understandable, Minerva said. Who will be performing the ceremony?
Sirius glanced at Augusta. We were hoping you would be willing, Augusta, he said hesitantly. The long-bottomed dowager looked startled. I'd be delighted, Sirius. It would be my honour.
There were several people who could perform wedding ceremonies. Clergy members, the minister, the headmaster, the judges. The members of the Wizengamot were considered judges in the wizarding world, and so Augusta could legally perform the ceremony. Sirius and Amelia had thought it would be nice to be married by a friend, and that wasn't even getting into the hassle it would take to find someone they would trust to allow access to McGonagall Castle. The meeting broke up shortly after that, as it was getting late. Minerva and Sirius disappeared towards the kitchens as several people started heading towards the flue, talking about menus and decorations, their direction indicating they would be talking to the house elves about making sure everything was perfect on the 31st. The adults left first, and the teenagers stuck around for a little while longer, talking since they still had some time before they needed to get to bed.
When do you think your parents will be released from St. Mungo's?
Ron asked, looking at Blaze and Daphne. The two Slytherins glanced at each other as Hermione dug an elbow into her boyfriend's side for his lack of tact. Ron winced, but still seemed to expect an answer.
The healer told me Mom could probably come home after tomorrow,
Blaze said softly, some of his worry seeping into his tone. Daphne sniffed loudly. Dad will probably be released by Christmas Eve. Ginny reached over and squeezed the older girl's hand gently. I'm so sorry, Daphne. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to ask. Daphne nodded, smiling slightly.
Harry coughed. I'm going to see how Astoria's doing. It's getting pretty late. She should probably be getting to bed soon.
They all nodded and said goodbye, though Ginny stood up as he made his way out of the room. I'll come with you. Ron, tell Mum I'll be home in a few minutes. The couple made their way up to the entertainment suite, talking through their bond.
We really need to get a look at some of the books in the Black Library,
Harry commented, pushing open a door. Ginny looked over at him and raised an eyebrow. You think? She was only being slightly sarcastic. Harry nodded mentally, glancing at her side along.
If any library were to have information on Horcruxes, I think that would be it. Sirius is always going on about how dark his family is. We might be able to find something that could help us.
Ginny sighed as they reached their destination. We'll have to plan carefully. We can't just disappear for the whole day. Someone is bound to find out, and we can't really answer their questions, can we?
Harry shrugged. We've already had this conversation with Snape. We can't do this alone, Gin. We'll need help.
I know, Ginny shot back. But now isn't the best time. When we're back at school, we'll tell them what we know. But if we tell them we're looking through the Black Library, they'll want to come. And then it won't be a simple operation, will it? How are we supposed to keep it a secret if 6 of us or more are sneaking off to Grimmauld Place? Harry sighed in defeat and sat down next to Astoria.
Hey, he smiled. How do you like the movie?
Astoria looked over at him and grinned. This is amazing, she gushed. It's so fascinating. Muggles really created this? There are so many to choose from. And it's so much more stimulating than listening to the wireless. Are they still creating new stories?
Harry chuckled. Whoa there. Calm down, Astoria. You're just as bad as Ginny.
Both girls blushed.
Yes, movies are still being made. When they first come out, people go to the cinemas to watch them on a bigger screen. Maybe next summer, we can all go see one. I took Ginny the summer before last, and she loved it.
Right up until the Dementors attacked, Ginny snorted.
Harry shrugged. Yeah, until that. Anyway, he stood up, offering a hand to his girlfriend. It's getting late. We should all get to bed now.
Astoria nodded. Can I watch another movie tomorrow? She asked as she stood as well.
Harry smiled. I'm sure that can be arranged.
He sent Astoria on up to her room and walked Ginny to the flue. He gave her a quick kiss goodnight before she stepped through, and he went upstairs. Daphne was waiting for him in his room. She smiled softly at him as he entered. Before he even realised what was going on, she was hugging him tightly. Thank you, she whispered. Harry's arms moved around her waist, and he almost felt like he was the only thing keeping her on her feet as she began to sob softly into his shoulder. Thank you for taking care of us and being there for Astoria. Thank you for everything you've done. Harry felt himself tear up slightly as he hugged her back.
You're welcome, Daff, he replied. I'm always here for you.
Daphne sniffed and pulled away, giving him a watery smile, before she headed back to her room. Harry watched her leave, perplexed, before shrugging and changing into his pyjamas. Line break. Over the next few days, Blaze and Daphne and Astoria spent their mornings at St. Mungo's, before returning to McGonagall Castle in the afternoon. Ron, Ginny and Susan came over most days, but Hermione had gone on a holiday with her parents for a few days. As she didn't want to be gone for Christmas, they agreed to a short trip to northern France and would return late Christmas Eve. Neville was spending some time fixing up one of his greenhouses, but he did come over quite a few times. 3 days after the holiday started, Madame Zabini was released from the hospital, and Blaise went home, after thanking Harry for his hospitality.
"You're welcome here any time,"
Harry said as they stood by the flue. Blaise nodded.
"Thanks, Harry. And thanks, Professor, for letting me stay,"
he said to Minerva, who was also in the room. Minerva smiled. "It was my pleasure, Mr. Zabini. And, as Harry said, you are welcome any time." Daphne gave her friend and fellow prefect a hug. "We'll see you later?" she asked hesitantly. And Blaise knew that she was still worried about her father and grieving over her mother, which was why her insecure side was coming out.
"Of course," he reassured her. "I'll come by tomorrow afternoon."
Once Blaise was gone, the teenagers went upstairs to watch a movie. Astoria was captivated by the moving images, and though her interest was more toned down, Daphne also found the concept fascinating. They had worked their way through all 3 Die Hard movies, 2 different James Bond films, Mary Poppins and Cinderella, all in the last few days alone. Harry found it rather amusing, but he understood. As purebloods, they were unused to the kind of technology that Muggles had created. The days continued to pass in a similar vein as Christmas drew closer. On Christmas Eve, Cyrus Greengrass was released from hospital, and, though weak, was able to go home. He thanked Minerva graciously for her assistance and for looking after his daughters, before the 3 of them headed back to the Greengrass Manor. Astoria gave Harry a hug, thanking him for everything, before Daphne gave her own goodbye. "I'll see you soon," she said. "Happy Christmas, Harry." Harry smiled. "Happy Christmas. And if you need anything, just ask." The 2 girls stepped through the flue and Cyrus held out a hand to Harry.
"Thank you, Mr. Potter, for being such a good friend to my girls,"
the Lord Greengrass said. Harry nodded, returning the handshake.
"I'm glad you're all right, Lord Greengrass."
Cyrus shook his head.
"Please, it's Cyrus. We are all comrades, are we not?"
Harry nodded again. They were on the same side, and Cyrus's words indicated that he was more willing to come off the bench than he had been before the attack. From Sirius's dealings with his faction of the Wizengamot, he knew that the Greengrasses were leaning more to the neutral side of light. They wouldn't support Voldemort, but they weren't too willing to fight either. Perhaps being attacked had changed Cyrus's mind. Once the Greengrasses had left, Harry went upstairs to prepare his room. The adults had given in to their children's pleading and allowed them to have a sleepover that night, before they all joined them at the castle in the next morning. Ron and Ginny arrived first, followed by Neville, Susan, and then Hermione. They spent most of the evening watching Bambi, and even Ron was crying by the end of the movie. After that, they headed up to Harry's room, where he made space for them by moving the chairs and sofa in his sitting area to the side and spreading out blankets and pillows. They dropped off quickly, eager for the next morning. Line break. Ron woke the rest of them up at 8 o'clock sharp. "Wake up, you lot!" he shouted. "Presents!" Harry rolled his eyes and shared an exasperated look with Hermione. "Is he 16 or 6? Asked Harry, rubbing sleep from his eyes. Hermione smiled and Ginny moaned. 5 more minutes, she mumbled. Harry sighed and bent over, giving her a kiss on the cheek. "Sorry, love, I don't think he'll give us that," he said contritely. Ginny groaned and sat up, making her way to Harry's ensuite. They spent a few minutes waking themselves up, brushing their teeth and taking care of other necessities, before they headed downstairs to join the adults. Tonks was already snuggled into Remus's side on the love seat as they entered the room. Sirius and Amelia walked in just behind the teenagers. Sirius had moved into the Bones estate permanently after Harry and the others returned to Hogwarts in September. Augusta arrived just a few minutes after Sirius and Amelia, followed quickly by Molly, Arthur, Bill, Fleur, and the twins. There were happy Christmases given all around as they settled in to open their presents. Harry opened up several new movies and games from Remus before Minerva pushed hers and Sirius's present towards him. Harry gasped as he pulled the wrapping paper off to reveal the newest broom not yet on the market, the Firebolt Mark II. It was scheduled for release next month. He looked up at his guardian, eyes wide.
How? Sirius smiled. One of the Bloke family investments includes stock in the Fireball Company. I was able to get this prototype, and it's personalised, if you take a look.
Indeed, on the shaft was his surname, written in gold lettering. Harry shook his head.
You didn't have to...
Minerva sighed. That is the basis for a gift, Harry. It's not something you have to give someone. We wanted to get this for you. It is a better broom than the one you currently own. The Fireball Company has done a good job of perfecting their model with this release. Harry considered for a moment before he grinned, rubbing a finger across the gleaming wood.
Thank you so much,
he said, beaming at his guardians. She was right that the Firebolt Mark II was better than the original Firebolt, though, of course, the original was no slouch. The second version was said to have improved a few minor issues that Harry had noted when he flew his Firebolt, such as the slight shaking that occurred when one flew over 110 km per hour. In addition, the footrests were more stable, and there were several more layers of cushioning charms added for extra comfort. An owl flew through the window at that moment, interrupting them. It landed on Ron's shoulder, and the redhead took the note clutched in its talons, confused. Written on the piece of parchment was Happy Christmas from Harry and Ginny. He looked up at his best friend and sister and said,
What?
Confused.
The two smiled. We teamed up, Harry explained. We figured you'd like your own pet, since, you know...
Ron clenched his teeth at the reminder of his old pet Scabbers. Damn rat! He forced himself to let it go and smiled.
Thanks, you two. He's wicked.
Ginny gave her brother a hug. He's a screech owl, and he doesn't have a name, so make sure you pick the right one. As if agreeing with her, the owl let out a loud hoot, its yellow eyes observing the room intelligently. They chuckled, and the owl took off, flying to a nearby perch where it settled. Ron studied the regal bird for a few moments, before he turned to Hermione.
What's the name of that god of the wind? You were reading a book on mythology this summer. What was he called?
Hermione looked thoughtful. What religion? Greek? Roman? Egyptian?
Ron shrugged. I dunno. It started with a Z, I think.
Hermione nodded. Zephyrus! He was the Greek god of the west wind.
Ron nodded eagerly. That's it!
He turned back to the owl, who was regarding him carefully.
How do you like Zephyrus? Zeph, for short.
The owl seemed to consider for a moment, before he gave an approving hoot and flew out of the window. I like it.